was lovely. That music feels like a deep breath to me. It's just lovely. You've been listening to Henry From playing Humoresque by Schumann. Hello, I'm Barbara Johnson. I'm representing Whatcom Chorale. On March 22nd, we will have the privilege and joy of singing Beethoven's Choral Fantasy with Henry featured as the piano soloist. Henry, thank you for spending time with us this afternoon. We are really looking forward to collaborating with you on the Choral Fantasy. In the meantime, though, I think our audience will enjoy getting to know you a little bit. And as a very brief introduction, Henry, who lives in Bellingham with his parents and sister and is now age 15, began his studies of classical music on the violin at age 3, followed shortly thereafter by piano. In those few intervening years, he has become a world-renowned performer and composer. How did this happen? Let's let him tell you. So my first question is actually more of a comment in that I don't feel quite right focusing on your age because I don't imagine that's what defines you. You're a musician. It doesn't really matter what your age is, but you are a wonderful musician. But you are young and have accomplished a great deal in your life. And one of my favorite things I've read about you is an essay you wrote at age 6, I believe, about your, quote, music family. Do you still think of composers, teachers, and fellow students as family? And can you tell us about them?
Well, what I was talking about in that essay was how my teachers all had teachers themselves, and so you can kind of trace back what like a family tree of teachers, and I'm still very interested in that, and I still am inspired by all of my teachers in this family tree. And of course I have different teachers than I had back then, and I've met many other teachers too, and for all of them what they say to me is important, and I take it seriously, and I think about it a lot. So in a sense they are kind of like family.
Do you feel that there's a musical legacy that comes from former composers that is being expressed through you somehow? Do you feel that sort of family connection? Almost as if they were, like your genes were tied to them in some way.
I think that when I'm learning or playing music by composers from even a long time ago, I can find out a lot about who they were because music can really express emotions, and that is one of the most important things that composers can do. So while I'm learning a piece by any composer, I can learn a lot about them, and so I feel like I get to know them very well in a certain way.
It's as if you're bringing that composer back to life in a certain way and representing the era in which he lived. So that's really cool, neat. And what about your personal family, your Bellingham family? What role do they play in your musical life?
My father and my mother both help tremendously because I study in Vancouver, so they drive me there. And of course, at the very beginning, they were the ones that would kind of teach me how to practice and encourage me to take my music seriously. And so I think that my family now is always supporting me and what I want to do with my music, and that's very important.
It is, I agree. Are there times when you actually play music together, all four of you?
Sometimes, yes. My sister plays violin, and my father plays some clarinet and piano, and my mother plays some cello and piano. So I've actually composed some pieces that we can all play together.
Oh, that's lovely. That's really neat. But then I wanted to ask you some questions about your education. I mentioned earlier that you began studying violin at age 3 and then became interested in piano. And it looks to me like you've taken piano to greater depths and greater extent than other instruments. Is there a reason that the piano has become your instrument of preference?
Yes, I think there's a reason, and I can say something about that, but the main thing is just that from the very beginning, I've always really loved the sound of the piano, and I can't really explain why, but it's something very special for me, and I feel a connection to it that I didn't always feel with the violin. I enjoy playing the violin very much, and I love orchestral music, and but for me as a performer, I think the greatest connection to the piano. It also is interesting to me because everybody knows of a limitation of the piano, which is that you can't always, there's a very little amount that you can do with the sound after you've played a note. But that kind of restraint is, it allows me to open up my imagination, and everything about playing the piano has to do with imagination, because the what you're actually doing in terms of like technique is very hard to define. I mean, with other instruments, you can actually see what they're doing to change the sound. But with the piano, it's you can't see it at all, and so everything that you're doing to express, you have to imagine, and that really fascinates me.
And are you saying then that what you're imagining then can play out through the way you actually touch the keys, and so your imagination is then represented in the way you...
Yeah, I mean, to give you an example, sometimes you would want a sound that kind of lifts up, or a sound that kind of goes down a bit, and so you can actually imagine, you can actually move your hand up a bit, or you can play with a little bit more weight in your wrist. But all of that, I mean, that doesn't make sense because, of course, to play a note, you have to push down on the key. So it's just something that you can use to imagine the sound that you want.
Yeah, yeah, fascinating. I would love to keep on going with that, but I do want to ask you what other interests you have when you're not playing the piano. What do you enjoy doing?
I enjoy learning languages and geography and math. Yeah.
I think they go together somehow. I've often felt that language and music are a good match for one another. Somehow they work hand in hand. I don't know how that is, but it does seem to be true. And math as well. Yeah, neat. Let me see. And these days, I read that you have a very busy performing schedule as well. It seems like you're all over the world. And I wonder how you manage your time when you've got flights to other parts of the world, you've got concerts and competitions and school. How do you juggle all that?
I think the most important thing is that I'm always enjoying what I'm doing. I love to practice, and sometimes I have to practice quite a bit to get ready for everything that I'm doing, but I enjoy every moment of it, and so it's not work really. It's and I get to go. Sometimes I get to play with really phenomenal musicians, and that's really rewarding. So I really enjoy it. That's how it all works.
Does that enjoyment then make it possible for you to approach a performance without feeling a lot of the anxiety that some other performers experience?
No, I always get nervous before performances. Um, and that's not because I'm not enjoying it when I'm performing. It's simply because there's a big responsibility that I feel, because I want the audience to have a experience of a good experience, to hear this music in a way that represents the composer in the best way possible. And I think that being nervous is not so bad, really. It means that you really care about what happens, and also I mean the excited kind of nervous feeling can make you actually hear different things. I always hear more things than I do in rehearsal when I'm performing. And
That's interesting, like your senses are more
yeah,
tuned in or sharpened.
yeah. So it can help you a lot, I think, being nervous.
Well, you say too that it's a responsibility to represent the composer. I'm curious about what, as a performer, when you are representing a composer, are you trying to create or recreate what the composer felt or experienced at the time of the composition? Or are you taking that music and then filtering it through your own sense of what it should be to present it to your audience?
It's a little of both, I think. I always want to do what the composer intended, and sometimes that's difficult because it's not always clear what they wanted, even if they wrote a marking. And yeah, you can interpret these markings in many different ways, so that then becomes a bit of my own interpretation and how I feel about the music. And another thing is, some composers didn't write as much in the score as other composers. For example, Bach didn't write anything, but the harmony that he uses and you can get many clues about how to play the music from the notes that he wrote. So sometimes it's not just about if the composer wrote soft or loud, or wrote an accent or staccato or anything like that. Sometimes it's just it truly is you reading the music in your own way, and then that tells you what you need to know.
And then it speaks for itself. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. I had no idea. Let's turn to Beethoven for a few minutes. I know in March, this coming March 22nd, you are going to be the featured pianist with Whatcom Chorale when we perform Beethoven's Choral Fantasy. And without spoiling it by playing it for us, if you have a few words to say about it, its significance to you personally or to to Beethoven's work in general, I'd love to hear it. Thank you.
Yes, well, when Deborah Brown suggested this to me, I was very excited, and I listened to it right away, and I had never heard it before, and it's just a really wonderful piece, I think. It begins with this very long piano introduction, and Beethoven in the premiere actually improvised it. So it's very improvisatory, and it goes through all these beautiful keys, and eventually the choir comes in, and there's a choir and orchestra and vocal soloists, and it just ends with this amazing, triumphant and joyful part, and I'm really looking forward to that. I think it will be a wonderful experience.
It will be. I know it. I can't wait to sing it and have you play it too. It's going to be great. I understand that you've just performed his Sonata number 24 in Vancouver, and I'd love it if you'd play a little bit of that for us. Thank you. Oh, that's fabulous. Thank you. I've heard that many times, but I've never been so close to it being performed where I could feel the vibrations coming through the piano. That's wonderful. Thank you. And I'd also like to ask you about your own compositions. I know you're quite serious about them, and I wonder how you approach the process. What kinds of things inspire you to compose?
For different pieces, I'm inspired by different things. I do usually now take inspiration from artwork, and some of the most recent compositions have been inspired by a Canadian group of 7 painters, and I've really always enjoyed seeing these paintings. They're very colorful, and so I feel like these paintings sometimes just immediately spark something that then can really help me develop a composition. But sometimes I'm not exactly sure where the inspiration comes from. Sometimes it's just the people that I'm writing it for. I've written some things for my own piano trio, and just kind of knowing them and the pieces that we've worked on, that inspires me. Or sometimes I'm inspired by the kind of ensemble I'm writing for. Yeah, so if I'm writing, I recently wrote a piece for a kind of a Baroque ensemble with, Baroque oboe and harpsichord, and a string quartet played on instruments from the era, and that was very inspiring. Just imagining the sound that they produce, which is very different from modern instruments. So many things can inspire.
Do you feel that you need to have some kind of competence in playing those instruments in order to compose for them?
Well, most of the instruments that I compose for, I don't play, because with an orchestral piece, there's all these wind instruments that I haven't ever played, and brass, and I know more about string instruments because I play the violin. But I do have so that's difficult. I have to learn a bit about that, and I have a composition teacher, Edward Top, in Vancouver, so he can help me with that because he has experience with that. But I do have an advantage, I think, which is that I play the piano. It's a lot easier to compose on the piano, I think, than other instruments because you have more of a sense of harmony and counterpoint, those things.
Yeah, interesting. I was just very curious about that. Since I don't play an instrument at all, I just wondered how it is possible to imagine different instruments playing different parts in something that you've imagined. So thank you for explaining that. That's really, really interesting. In 2018, Whatcom Chorale had the great pleasure of performing your composition, Solstice, and that was a delight. So thank you very much for that. And that leads me to the question of composing for voice versus composing for orchestra. How different are they, and how does the music, the melody, and the lyrics, how do they find one another?
Yeah, that's true. That's another thing that inspires me, of course. The first thing that I think about when I'm writing a choral piece is the lyrics, what they mean, and I always spend a bit of time just learning the poem and kind of letting it get into my system a bit, and thinking about how it could shape the music, kind of. And there's some obvious things like word stress. The music has to somehow fit the text, and so that it feels okay to sing it. But of course, I love to try my best to create textures and kind of sound worlds that reflect the text, and that's not always very easy, I think. Sometimes it takes me a few drafts. I will kind of start with a very simple melody and something and then I will add layers and ideas that help me kind of get the poem across.
You certainly did that with Solstice. I remember singing it really well, and there are parts in it that are so pure and silent that it just felt like we were standing in the middle of a snow-covered plain, and it was just ethereal. So thank you. Speaking of your compositions, is there anything that you're working on currently or have completed that you'd like to play some of for us?
I will play a fairly recent composition, Chorale and Variations, wonderful, which is for piano.
Great. Hey, bravo, that was beautiful. I like that very much. Thank you, thank you. That's just about all the questions I have, but I can't end this interview without letting everyone know that you recently won an international piano competition and were awarded, I need to get this right, were awarded first prize at the Orchestra Symphonique de Montréal Manulife Music Competition in the Piano B, age 17 and under category. That's fantastic. How was that experience for you?
It was very exciting. I enjoyed the whole week, the whole experience of going to Montreal and playing. Of course, I was very nervous and I didn't expect to be one of the finalists. And so it was kind of a dream come true. But I think, I felt like that now that I had won this competition, I was just the same pianist, and I had been very lucky, very fortunate. But I'm still the same pianist, and now, actually, it was just a few weeks ago that I went back to the competition to watch one of my friends perform and compete, and she also won first place. So that was
wonderful.
very fun. Yeah.
That's great. So you've met a lot of other musicians of your age and experience.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. That is just wonderful. And I also learned recently that you have been named as one of the 30 hot Canadian classical musicians under 30 for 2019. I love that kind of non-classical language word, hot, is used to describe a classical musician, and you in particular. Do you think that language might help other young people relate to classical music?
Well, I think it's kind of a catchy title, and I think that it would spark the interest of some young people, and that's all that it takes, because then once you expose people to classical music, there's sure to be a few that enjoy it and want to hear more, and that's important, I think.
I agree with you. Thank you. Thank you so much for spending time with us. I appreciate everything you've had to say.
Thank you.
And I wish you all good things in the future, and I'm sure they'll come your way.
Thank you.